of the making of a children's evangelist, Kid Challenge here. And so we've studied already about the salvation part of my life, the doctrine. Now we're going to go into devotion. Devotion. Remember in the last video, something very supernatural opened up in my life of prayer. And God began to call me. I wasn't even praying. I was just at the right place at the right time, and God began to speak. And I began to grow a concern for prayer and a love for prayer, a love for God's presence, and also at the same time a love for my family. I came to church. I would come to church by myself. Then my little brother came, and then my little sister came, then my parents came, my older siblings. Um, so I began to grow just an awareness of prayer and just a need for God's presence. And I remember Pastor praying. I remember him teaching about prayer. I began to build a prayer altar in my home, and it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. Uh, I remember one night the church was having a prayer night and prayer journey night. And so I joined. I especially like the part of praying the word. I was in Bible quizzing. Man, I was loving that, and then all the different aspects of the prayer journey. And then, I thought, this is pretty awesome. So I'm going from station to station, and, you know, I'm I'm looking forward to the next station, and I'm looking down the hall. The last room is the Bible quizzing room. It was dark though, and I was hearing strange noises from that room. And I'm like, I'm not gonna go there. It was on the paper on the door it said intercessory prayer. I said, whoa, what is this? And I said, I'm gonna give it a try. I began to give it a try. And this is where I began to get a concern for my family, my lost loved ones. And I went to that that side of the prayer and that station of prayer, and God began to open up a lot of things in intercessory prayer in my life. So I began to pray intercessory prayers for my family. I would do a lot of crazy stuff at home, praying and touching things, pleading the blood, putting oil. I would come to church, and sometimes I'd go to the altar as my mom. I'd go to the altar as my dad, as my brothers, my sisters. So you get the message here. You get the picture here. This young man is just, is fighting for his family. And, you know, I began to pray in my room and just pray, pray, pray. But at the same time, there was drugs in my home, and my dad was on drugs, making fun of me, just doing a lot of things like that. It was a spiritual fight. I remember one morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, evil spirit came into my room. I knew it was an evil spirit, could smell it, and it was the marijuana spirit. And God began to deal with me. I got up, began to rebuke it, fight it, wrestle it, until Jesus helped me to cast out that spirit out of our family. And a couple weeks after that, I thank God my dad began to change, but it was through intercessory prayer. It was through intercessory prayer. It was a spiritual battle. It was a spiritual battle. And the spiritual battle, this is the devotion part of my life, how the church brought devotion into my life. You know, I would see my pastor, his wife praying, interceding. I want to do that. I want to do that. I can remember, if you want to just go back just a little bit, before my parents were saved, another key thing that happened. I remember going to the altar, raising my hands. The Lord said, put your hands down. I did. He said, get on your knees. I did. He said, get on your face. I did it. The Lord said, I want to speak to you. Get on your face if you want me to speak to you. So I got on my face. The Lord asked me while I was on my face during that altar call, what do you want? And I told the Lord, I asked him humbly, I responded. I said, Lord, please save my parents. Please save my family. And I can feel the hand of God upon me. Yes, I would do that. The Lord just equipped me to teach them Bible study. And long story short, God answered our prayer. God answered my prayer. But this was the part of intercessory prayer, prayer and devotion, devotion, devotion. And the spiritual battle that, that was happening, that I could, you know, pray and I could trust God. And I tell you, you know, through salvation, having a love for the word, doctrine, and now moving into devotion really, really helped me. And it shaped me as a young hyphen person, right? I was coming out of my teenage years now, a young adult. I had to make some decisions. Was I going to live a life that was out there in the world? Was I going to dedicate myself to the things of the world? Or was I going to dedicate myself to prayer? I had to, and several times in my life where, I was tempted, I ran to prayer. I ran to prayer. And prayer is still the key in my life. I don't, you know, I trust God. I pray, try to have a walk with God. And devotion became part of my life. And, even though I didn't have a vehicle, I had a bicycle. And I may talk about my bicycle here in a minute. But in the next video or so. But, you know, I couldn't live without prayer. And I began to pray, begin to, have the love for prayer. Not just, and prayer became key and is still key in my life. And so this is the devotion part. This is the devotion part that I uh, want to bring to you. So this is the making of a children's evangelist. Before I go on trips and all of that to go minister, or even to minister here, or to go out in the community here, I can't go without first praying. First praying. And everything that we do. I know when we go into street ministry, I tell the staff, we're not touching anything, we're not moving anything, we're not setting up anything until we have prayed. I've carried it over into ministry, into my personal ministry, personal life, all those times of prayer, all those, you know, memories of prayer, all those testimonies of prayer, the teaching from my pastor about prayer, feeling God in prayer. So prayer is was part of my devotion and still is again. So this is the part of the making of a children's evangelist that is so important. Prayer, prayer, and prayer is the key. Prayer is the key. I'll tell you one testimony before I leave you here. I remember being in a state. I was in the hotel. They were going to come pick me up. I had everything ready to go. Well, the pastor called and said, we're going to be about an hour or so late. Can you just wait for us? So we're going to pick me up. And that hour was a very critical hour because when I went back I said, I'm not just going to waste my time. I'm going to go pray. I'll change everything. Matter of fact, he gave me specific words and God performed it in that service. Exactly the way he told me he was going to perform it, he performed it. And you know what? I would not have been able to do that if I wouldn't have learned it early in my life. That prayer time. That prayer time became valuable for children. And children were impacted. Children were impacted for eternity in that service because of prayer. because of tapping in to that devotion of prayer. So now you see salvation, man. I love preaching the Acts 2:38 message. I love seeing kids saved, and doctrine. I love preaching the doctrine. Now that doctrine's been part of my life, and now devotion. Carried that into my remaining ministry and personal